Hey everybody. So yeah, we're still in validation world right now. Now I feel like this is the perfect time to do this because we have a broad enough example, and I think pretty much every kind of example of attribute that we're going to use. So this was a great time to do this, and we don't have like too many. Like we don't have thousands of them. We have dozens of them. And so we're trying to craft a validation scheme. And so the validation scheme that we've crafted so far is incomplete. Um, so just a quick note. Basically, right towards the beginning, or like maybe 4 months ago, I implemented animations in this thing. And at the time, I remember saying, "This isn't the time to do this. This is too early. I don't have enough. I'm going to do this wrong 100%, but I just really want it. I want it really bad. I want animations because animations are cool." Um, and now I'm starting to see that where I went wrong on animations and how I basically have to gut the entire animation scheme and move more like this in some ways. Not exactly like this, but more like this. Um, so this is what we have. Basically, in this is where we're at for uh, for scenes. There's a concept called fogs, and in linear fogs, I added nope, not in linear, in exponential fogs. There's a concept called fog density, and so I just got a wild hair and decided I was going to get animations working for the first time. And if you type in A, it says it's an invalid floating point manager, and that comes in here. Now, basically, in here is the template. So inside the template, there's something that looks at there's some code, and it looks at the form element, the form control for fog density, and it checks to see if it has an error, and if it has this specific error, invalid positive float. Now, invalid positive float, something I completely made up, has error, something that comes with Angular forms, form controls, something that comes. So if you break this up, basically there's three parts of it. There's the form control itself, totally made up by Angular. There's the has error method, totally made up by Angular. The invalid positive float, totally made up by me. So it's important to kind of have those things in your head. Now, this text here, totally made up by me, totally unscalable, totally unreusable, complete mistake. Obviously, a mistake to leave this process without somehow commonizing this text here. I'm obviously, when I go to uh, add validation to far and near, I'm going to want to use that text, and I don't want to copy and paste this code over. I want to use the right text for this invalid positive float thing that I made up. So that's that. I think that gives you sort of an understanding of what's going on at the very lowest level, at the level of the form. Now, as somebody who has been coding in this stuff in front end and JavaScript since 1996, and in Angular for over 10 years, whenever I've worked at places, I've generally there's been plenty of work for me to do at this template and controller and service layer level, and that's generally been the best use of my time at most places. And generally, I don't spend a lot of time focused on architecture issues. I did generally can understand the architecture issues and can understand and work with them and craft solutions that fit within architectures. But one of the architectures that I've always really struggled with and have seen botched everywhere I've ever worked has been validations. So so let's move up. We're moving from the template, and we're going to move up to the component level. So at the component level, um, I create this form control called a fog density form controller, and I give it this validators scheme, this validators uh, array, which is basically the fog density validators, which is just one. It just checks to see if it is a floating point number. So that's how the form control gets made, and all that. And then I add the form control. So that I think is pretty typical. All form controls, I didn't embed anything in there. And then I do these two sort of hacky things so that so validation gets executed when you first turn it. I think this is super, super hacky. I learned how to do it from ChatGPT. Hopefully it's not always necessary, but for now, you have to tell the form that it's been modified or it won't execute, and that's just something that's behind the scenes in Angular form controls. All right, so now the next question is, okay, what are these fog density validators? And that is a single function, but that's in an array with a single function, and there's something called a validation service, UI validation service, and we get the validator from this UI validation service. We put it into an array, and then that's what we add here. Up here is where we create an array, and basically this is highly, highly specific to Angular controls. All right, so basically up to here, everything is purely Angular. There's no concept of anything outside of Angular, and there would be no way for anything outside of Angular to use any of this stuff, because it's very, 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 very specific. So that's an important thing to know, because in this application there is going to be things outside of Angular that interact with ThreeJS and that need to use these validations. So that's the important thing to keep in mind. So one thing that you should jump out at you is that none of the logic of how something is validated has been revealed yet. All right, so now we looked at the template, and that's here. Then we looked at the controller, or the component, the TypeScript component, which is one level up in my mind. So we got the template, which is like the markup, and it has that. We do have the one major issue in that in our template we actually have this content of this text here is in the actual at the template level, so it's absolutely not reusable. The way in this current architecture, we would never ever be able to reuse that in any way, shape, or form. I'm not saying that anything that's in a template isn't reusable, but I'm saying in this architecture, the way things are built, the way things are tied directly to components or to controls, there's no way any other control could ever use it, or any other form could ever use it. All right, so we're going to take one more step up, and we're going to go to the service. And this is the UI service. So when we go up to the UI service, basically we have this concept of the floating point validator. And basically what it will do is it will return this very, very Angular forms specified function. And in that, this is what that is. And we know that the thing that we are going to send this function to, that it expects a function that you pass a control to at the beginning, and that control will have, then how do I say these words? That control will have some kind of it'll return it can return a null. We know that from here, or it can return this object called a validation errors object. And that validation errors object would have will be in this thing, and it'll have something. It doesn't know what it's going to have. And this is where we make up the whole concept of the invalid positive float error and truth. So there's like this big jump, right? Because the controller, the TypeScript of for the component doesn't know anything about this invalid positive float. There's like a big gap, right? So if you're just looking at the template, it's a good way. Kind of wish I should have made a small change in the template. Toolbox, scene manager. If we were to look in this template, I'm just going to put a space in there so that it's a different color, and hit save. If we were looking this template and we're trying to figure out what this is, we would not be able to determine that by looking at the TypeScript. And I find that to be very, very confusing in general. And I do find that there's no, like, is this something that comes with Angular? It sounds so official. Is this something that comes with Angular Forms, or is this something that we made up? That is the hard part. That's the hard part that is going to be difficult for someone to figure out. So you notice it's like different color now, so it'll be easier. So we go to the UI validation service, and that's where this concept of invalid is basically defined, and it's defined deep in code, and we set it to true. So that's how it gets set to true, and the way that is set to true is if this validation function executes and it returns a valid. So I think if this returns a, what in the world? See, this gets so abstract. Okay, so this is a function, and it's going to return a true or a false. And if it returns a true, then it'll return a null. And if it returns a false, it'll return, and then valid, it'll return this object. And in the template, it's looking for this object that we defined, and it'll be true. So basically what we're saying is if we get a null or if it's an empty string, go ahead and set invalid. It's not a valid positive float. If we have something else, then go ahead and send that something else. So that's some text to this validation function, and it's going to return a true or a false. And if it returns a true, then return a null. Yeah, that's confusing. If it returns a false, then return this. Okay, so we're already super abstract. It's very, very confusing. And it's like, why? Why would you do this? What's the point? And the point is, the reason we want to do this is because we are going to need this validation outside of, like, if I'm importing something like from a CSV or something else, I'm going to need to be able to validate things that way too. So this validation here needs to come from someplace else, and that someplace else is defined up here, and it goes to the validation service. So it's not the UI validation service, but the generic validation service, and it's going to get the positive floating point validator function. It gets that from there, and it has to be declared here outside of this function, because this cannot be found inside of this function, because this function here is going to be executed outside of this context. That's a whole mouthful of things. I think I spent 1 or 2 complete videos on that, and all that. So now let's take one more step up, and let's go to the validator service directly. So now we're at the validation service. So this is the highest level up. It's outside of, it doesn't have anything to do, it doesn't care at all, has no awareness of Angular whatsoever. It's just a pure function that takes a string and returns a true or false. And that's all it does. And so we'll be able to take this string and use it to test positive floating pointer validator. We'll be able to test positive floats against this outside of Angular. And that's the whole point. That's the whole reason. So that's confusing. Okay. There's no way that you can get that and understand what I don't think, unless you already understand what I'm talking about, there's no way you're going to be able to understand that without some deep study of these sorts of concepts. But you're hearing it here, and you'll hear it again, and you hear it again if you're in this business, and eventually it'll start to stick, or maybe it makes sense, but the only reason it makes sense to you is because you've already studied this. But that's not it. That's not all. So basically, we need a way to determine if something is up, if something is a positive float or not, like how it should be validated. And basically what I did, and it took 3 videos, probably 3 sessions, I created this validation dictionary, which says, hey, for a scene and for fog density, we're going to have a positive float. And then we'll also, and the idea is that in the future, we'll also have another, this function for, we'll have another thing called comma, and it will be near, and that will be a positive float. And then the idea is that something else will be able to check to see, hey, I have a scene and I have near, what is the validation? And that validation is either going to be something that finds here, if it's fog density or near, it'll be a positive float, or it'll be none. And that's how that will work. And so that, and I am choosing to call this little guy here, this positive float that they get back, that then they use to put all this together, a token. So you're going to get this positive float token, and then for your positive float token, you're going to find out that you need this validation types. So there's 2 major pieces missing in the puzzle. One major piece is this text, the text that I've shown you down here for exponential fog. Right, I'm going to want to use that text outside of this So it needs to be outside of the UI in general, because I may be like, who knows how I might use it, but I will probably want this. I'll probably want some sort of text to describe what it does. So I probably will need a function up here that returns this text, and this is at the validation service. So for us to use this, it's going to be defined at the validation service, and then we'll go one more layer down to the UI service, and then we'll go another layer down to the controls TypeScript. So now the controls TypeScript, not the controls, the components TypeScript, and then finally that'll get rendered at the template level. So that's 4 layers of abstraction, right? To get this information, which is going to be so hard for someone to follow the crumbs, like a developer, to work backwards up. And I just don't know how else to do it. And I would have cursed. I would have absolutely cursed an architect for this. And now I totally understand why. And that was actually a big reason for that. Okay, so that's the one piece that's missing. The second piece that's missing is I really do need at the layer of the UI validation service. Right now, I just ask for this positive floating, and I really need to ask for that token. and get this guy here. And then in here, for this token, I need to get the validation right here. So basically, I need a more generic, like, get validation for token. And then it accepts the token. And if it's the right token, then it gets, if it's the positive float, then it gets this one. And then inside of this, for that token, I need to get the text. Is that right? No. Then I also need another function that gets me the text for the token. And I need another function up at the top, at the validation service, to get the text for the token. So that's a lot of talk, 20 minutes of talk. So just so I write some code, I'm going to say get validation text for token. And that's going to take a validation types. And it's going to return a string. And then, so like that. Oh, I think it's just upset that I'm not returning anything. Return. And that should work like this. If token is equal to positive float, return so we're going to go through 4 layers of code, of instances, of layers of abstraction to get this one piece of text to show down here, which seems batshit crazy to me. But I cannot think of a better way to do this, so that when I do my import, and the thing is a lot of places they'll say, oh, well, when we do some outside thing, blah, 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 we need to do this. And the thing is, in most places, you're never going to get to the import. Let's just be honest. Or even if you try to get to the import, it's just going to fail and fail and fail. You'll never get there. If I don't get there, this application failed. That's the proof of concept. That is probably the most important part of the proof of concept, is that. So yes, we're getting there, or this is going down the garbage. There's no other option. So anyway, so let equals. So it's going to be empty. And then I learned a long time ago that you should always have one entrance and one exit. And that is kind of one of those things that goes back and forth. I find that while this is very silly in many cases, if there's a ton of things, it's just so much easier in the debugger if you just have one entrance and one exit. But, just because at this point you can put a debug statement and you can read what's in message. So if there was a bunch of things. So anyways, so we're not using this code yet, but basically we're going to get validation text for token and all that. And I just wanted to write some code because literally 20 minutes of this was just literally just me just trying to get a sense of where we stand and what still needs to be done in this validation scheme. So we still got a long ways to go. Happy coding, everybody. Bye.